Hey there! In today's video, I'm going to weigh in on the age-old question of whether we should buy or rent the home that we live in. Now, the way that I see it, there's two major components to this question. There's the financial side of things, and then there's the lifestyle side of things. And a lot of people only focus on the financials, but the lifestyle component is very important to consider as well. Now, when it comes to the financial component of this question about whether to buy or rent the home that we live in, it's important to compare two main things. First of all, you've got the monthly sunk costs to buy or to rent, and whichever one of these is lower is going to play a major factor in making this decision. And then you have to compare the return on investment of either making a down payment on a home and seeing the value of that home appreciate over time, or taking that money and allocating it towards other investments like investing in the stock market, for example. On the lifestyle side of the equation, it really depends on the preferences of each individual person. And while some people might be really motivated by the goal of owning a home, others might not want to be tied down to one place and might be totally comfortable just renting for an extended period of time. And so making that comparison really depends on what you value. Now, for me personally, I do own property. I own this condo. And the reason why I made this decision is because I compared the monthly sunk costs to renting versus buying a property of these same specs. And I discovered that buying would be approximately the same as renting. And so then I turned my focus towards the lifestyle side of the equation. And I discovered that actually I am motivated by the goal of home ownership. And psychologically speaking, it's always something that I've wanted to achieve. So that was really the deciding factor in my decision to purchase this property here. And so for anybody else that's kicking around with this decision and thinking about what to do, I think it's first important to compare the financials. And then if you discover that the monthly sunk costs of buying are less than or at least equal to those of renting, it then turns to the lifestyle component and whether or not you actually want to own a home, if you want to be tied to one specific location. But without further ado, I'm going to get into some of the analysis of the financial side, and then I'm going to give a little bit more detail on the lifestyle component of this question of whether to buy or rent the home that you live in. Okay. So on the financial side of things, first of all, we're comparing the monthly sunk costs to buying and then to renting. Now with renting, it's very easy. Your monthly sunk cost is basically just your rent. Usually your landlord is going to cover things like the property tax and the home insurance, etc., condo fees, whatever. But if those aren't covered within your rent, then obviously you have to include them as well. On the buying side, it's a little bit different. You have to account for all those separate things and then calculate them on a monthly basis. So property tax for the year divided by 12, insurance on the property for the year divided by 12, condo fees divided by 12, but also you have to look at the mortgage payment and split it out into two components. Because every time you make a mortgage payment, a portion of that is going towards the principal and a portion of that is going towards the interest. And only the interest portion of the mortgage payment is a sunk cost. The mortgage interest is the cost that you pay to borrow that money from the bank. But the principal is not a cost, it's not a sunk cost, it's actually an investment because you're gaining equity in the home every time you make a payment on the principal. And then potentially you're earning more on that if the value of your property is appreciating over time. So you have to take that portion out of the mortgage payment. That's not a monthly sunk cost and it doesn't go into this calculation. For me here, for example, I live in a condo building. And that means I'm going to have actually a few more monthly sunk costs than if you lived in a home, a freehold piece of property where you're not beholden to anyone for condo fees, etc. But the list of sunk costs to own a condo are the mortgage insurance, then you got property tax, and then you've got home insurance, and then you've got homeowners fees or condo fees, and then you've got maintenance. And that's something that you only have to think about as an owner, because if you're renting, of course, you can just call up your landlord when something goes wrong, and they're responsible for fixing it. But if you own your own property, you have to have factored in a certain amount that you're going to put away and allocate towards maintenance. And then finally, you also have to factor in the one-time sunk costs to buy a home. And these can actually add up quite a bit. You've got legal fees, closing fees, you got to pay the realtor. And so what I've done is I've taken the total amount of one-time sunk costs to purchase this home, and then I've prorated them over a 60-month or a 5-year period to give me a rough idea of how much it's costing per month. And you don't have to do it over a 5-year period. You could do it over a 10, 15, 20, 25-year period, depending on how long you think you're going to own the property. But in any case, you have to factor this in because it is a sunk cost. And a lot of people don't realize that, it's not something that's building up equity in your home. When you pay those legal fees, those closing fees, That's just money that's gone. And so when you have all of your monthly sunk costs to buy calculated, you can compare that to how much you would pay in rent for the exact same property or a very similar property, similar specs. And if one is significantly higher or lower than the other, then that could give you a pretty good idea of which direction you should be leaning in when it comes to making this decision about whether to buy or to rent. But then, of course, you also have to think about the other side of the financial component, which is the return on investment. So when it comes to comparing the return on investment of either buying or renting, what you do is you take the down payment amount, and then you also have to account for the monthly principal that you're paying down on the loan as you build up equity in the home. And that's the other half of the mortgage payment. You've separated out the mortgage interest. So now we're looking at the principal payment. And then you're adding that each month to your total amount. And you can just find a compound interest calculator anywhere online. And then you put down, your down payment, your initial payment, and add in your monthly payments, which are the principal payments from your mortgage. And then you have to really just guess what the average rate of appreciation is going to be on that piece of property in your area. It's going to be different everywhere, but if you assume something safe between like 5 and 7% per year, that's probably what it's going to work out to on average, unless you live in a place that's really a bubble. Prices are rising really quickly. Or on the flip side, prices of real estate do go down sometimes. And so maybe you want to account for that as well. So moving to the rental side of the equation, what you do is you take the same amount that you would have made as a down payment, and then you consider that to be your upfront investment in the stock market or wherever you're deciding to invest. Then of course you have to also add an additional monthly contribution. That's the same amount as the mortgage principal payment in the case of owning a property. Because if you're not owning, then you should have that additional amount of money to put towards some type of investment. And then additionally, what you should do is you should compare the sunk cost to rent, or just your rental fees, to the sunk cost to buy. And let's say that the sunk cost to rent is lower than the cost to buy by $100. Then that means that you have an additional $100 each month that you could potentially invest in the stock market. And vice versa, if your monthly sunk cost to rent is higher than your cost to buy by $100, then you have to subtract that amount from what you could potentially invest each month in the stock market. Once you know the amount that you can make as an additional monthly contribution to your investment, if you're renting is going to be, then you can use the compound interest calculator, same as on the other side. You put in your principal investment, you add in what the monthly contribution is going to be, and you assume a rate of return on the stock market or whatever your investment is going to be. Once you have those numbers, you can compare over any time horizon, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and you can see on which side where you're going to have a better rate of return. Now, this is where a little bit of guesswork comes into play because, of course, you don't know what the rate of return is going to be. You don't know how much your property is going to appreciate, and you don't know how much the stock market is going to appreciate. And so a good thing to do here is just use a benchmark, a historical benchmark. Let's say the last 5 or 10 years, what has been the average rate of return in the stock market, and then the same thing on the property side of things. And that should give you a pretty good idea of what you can expect moving forward unless anything crazy happens. And so that's the whole of the financial side of this decision. Once you've done those calculations, you can compare both parts and you can see, okay, where is the higher monthly sunk cost and where is going to be the greater return on investment if I'm going to allocate my money towards purchasing a property or if I'm going to put it in the stock market and see my money grow that way. Another really important thing to mention here, and this factors in a little bit to the lifestyle and the psychological component of this question about whether to buy or to rent. But if you own a property and you have a mortgage, every single month you are forced to invest. Every time you make a payment on the principal amount of the mortgage, you're building up equity in the home, and then if the value of the home appreciates, you're earning additional money on top of that. So being forced to invest really does keep you accountable, and it's a good way to make sure that every month you're putting some money towards something that's productive. On the rental side of the equation, you have to be self-disciplined because nobody is forcing you to invest that money. And so each month you have to make sure that you invest the same amount or more than you would have done if you owned that property. Because if you don't, then obviously the equations that we just went through and the comparison on the return of investment is completely invalid and it doesn't apply. Okay, so now we have the lifestyle component of whether it's better to buy or to rent a home. Now here, like I already said, it really just depends on your personal preference. So some people are super motivated by the goal of home ownership, and psychologically speaking, it's something that they've always wanted and they really just need to do. And in my case, I think I do fall into that category. On the flip side though, you do have much more freedom if you're renting, especially if you've finished your lease and you're just on a month-to-month basis. You're free to go pretty much anytime you want, and you're not tied down to any particular place. So if that's the type of lifestyle that suits you, then I think that should really factor in heavily into your decision. But this lifestyle component, really, it should only be a final decision-making factor, in my opinion, if the sunk costs to rent and to buy and the return on investment of renting and buying is similar. If there's huge discrepancies, let's say that renting is much more expensive than buying and that the return on investment of purchasing a property is going to be significantly higher, then I don't think it makes sense to discount that in favor of some of the lifestyle considerations. But if it is a really close call, when you look at the financial components of this decision, that's when I think the lifestyle aspects become really important. Personally, when it came time to make my decision, and I made the comparison between the monthly sunk cost to rent and to buy, I found that they were very similar. And I did the same thing for the potential return on investment. Again, found that they were very similar. So I weighed my decision much more heavily on the lifestyle components of the question. Well, thanks for watching. That's my take on whether it's better to buy or to rent the home that you live in. I'm just adding my voice to the chorus of many others that have weighed in on this debate on YouTube. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.